time to wake up and pray up here on the Finding Faith in Losing Sleep podcast. In the beginning, episode 18. I think it's episode 18, Pierre.
No, not 18.
What is it? How many?
I think we're at 60. This is 16.
Well, the sixes and the eights. All in the beginning, episode 16. How about that? I did that pretty well.
Like you start it, and you start that way all the time, but somehow you start up Michelle. This time around, she like jumped.
That's funny. Hey, I'm Wes Easley, one of your hosts at Loafing It over on Twitter. Pierre is talking. He is the producer extraordinaire, the guy that kind of runs the ship here. I'm sorry that you have to do that, Pierre, because I know that I can get off-kiltered a little bit sometimes, and you probably take a lot of heat for doing that, Pierre.
No, it works out well. I mean, we have another pod together that you kind of produce, so it's just kind of flipped over here. And, I mean, you got your moments, but I can push through and edit what I need to if necessary.
He is Pee-wee31 over on Twitter, at Pee-wee31 on Twitter. And his wife joins us on this podcast. Pierre talked about a sports podcast, him and I do. But this one, Finding Faith, Losing Sleep podcast, his wife joins us. Just kind of, we thought, guys, I listened to past episodes since the last time we talked. I've been listening to some past episodes. And at one time, I thought, Michelle, that you were going to be on this podcast to kind of separate Pierre and I from talking about things, because we talk about some controversial topics. And then Pierre said, no, I think I'm supposed to be separating you two, is what it ends up being. That is Michelle at Pack411. Go Pack Go 411.
That is correct, Wes, but I'm not even sure about that. I think sometimes you separate Pierre and I.
He gets me in trouble. What happens?
We are an everyday podcast just for everyday listeners. None of us have gone to a theological school, no seminary. We haven't done any of that. We have studied the Bible, though. We're talking about things biblically, but also just life issues and trying to come together on all the different topics. And sometimes we got to agree to disagree. And the reason why the three of us together work out so well, I believe, is because we all have three different backgrounds. We all have three different, styles of life going on. I'm a Southern guy. Those guys are in the Midwest. They're married. I'm married. Just we got a lot of different perspectives, and it's cool to have us come together and to talk about these things, guys.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's nice, and it's just good to share perspective, because the Bible's a lot. And I think that we talked about how we all kind of get different things from it. We all can kind of interpret, the Bible differently. And it's good to talk it out, because I think that's the case with many listeners. They have their own opinions formed, or they get something different out of it. And sometimes it makes you think and kind of ponder what means, what the context could have been back in those years and things along those lines.
Well, and sometimes it can just be flat out intimidating. I mean, like for me, I'm like, it's overwhelming. So what I mean by intimidating is I get overwhelmed by it sometimes. And so maybe that's where I feel intimidated by it. So for me, it helps tremendously to be able to talk through it, because that's how I learn best. So
yeah, and Pierre, you said the Bible is intimidating, or just it has a lot of different topics in it and everything like that. And life does too. Life throws a lot of different topics our way. And I went all the way back to the beginning and started listening to those episodes, because they have staying power, right? It maybe not. It's probably not something that you can't go back and listen to the first one and listen all the way through to catch up to this one without pulling something out of it, because it's not necessarily trending topics. They're solid topics that everybody struggles with. But we even talked about that one episode. We talked about suicide and abortion. I was like, what? We did talk about that. I forget about these things, but man, that's kind of controversial stuff. And we did it in a way that I would think would be pleasing to our Father in heaven. I thought we did a good job in talking about that, discussing it with open minds and open hearts, and trying to understand all the different perspectives. And that's what we need today, I believe.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping to do, because they can be difficult subjects. And so just talking through it, and hopefully the Lord has his hands on this, and he speaks through us, and it comes through the microphone.
Amen.
Oh, no. And hey, there was a young lady who approached me. I've known her through work a little bit and everything. And we've known each other through church league softball and stuff. Her husband plays softball. I play softball. So our circle started getting a little bit tighter, And she came to me and she asked me for prayer. one day, and she told me what was going on, and I told her, yeah, I would. And then, Michelle, it's something similar to, medical things that you were going through at one time. So I said, hey, I got this podcast. And so I was able to reach out and, just send that her way, hopefully to talk about some things that are going on and to be able to hear your testimony, Michelle, to be an encouragement to her. So that was cool. And she was an encouragement to me that day.
That's amazing. And I'm glad we go through things to help, I believe, to help others. So, God can use us for good. So please encourage her if she wants to reach out to me too. I'm happy to speak with her. Oh,
sure. I'll do that. And then, that takes me back to the valley and the mountain episode. Remember we talked about that stuff too? That's good. It all ties together.
We had some good conversations. Like it's went better than I thought it would, if I'm being honest, like much, much better than I thought. And that's just kind of eye-opening and heartwarming all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we wanted to jump back all the way, and we're going to, change these episodes up a little bit, but we decided that we wanted to talk about the Bible a little bit more. Not all the way, not all the time, but doing a way that the three of us can talk about these things. And that's why I said this episode titled, Pierre, and I may have stole it from you. I don't know if that's what you were going to call it or not, but in the beginning. And I keep doing that. I don't know why I keep doing it that way, but that's the voice I've been doing as I've been practicing this. But we wanted to go all the way back to Genesis and talk about the things that are going on in Genesis. And Genesis chapter 1 is just packed full of controversial topics. Can I say that? Genesis 1 is just a controversial chapter in the Bible because it talks about God creating the heavens and the earth. It talks about God creating the earth, and people have different perspectives on that, of how we became into existence, how the earth came to existence, how planets came to existence, what all it's doing and everything. And guys, you two know me a little bit. Pierre, you know me a little bit better than Michelle does.
Yeah.
And Pierre, you know that I have a very open mind. And so I look into a lot of different perspectives, not only on the creation of mankind, but the creation of the planets, all the solar systems and everything. I've explored, I've read, I've listened, I've asked questions, and I still can't make more sense of it than just the simplicity of a creator, a designer, designing this stuff that we see every single day, our even our bodies, our lives, everything. I can't get to a better conclusion than there was a designer who did it, and then bam, he wrote about it in Genesis.
Yeah, that's kind of where some of the faith starts, is right off the bat. Is Genesis kind of helps make sense of this life, because that's one of the bigger questions is, what's this life about? Like, where did all this stuff come from? And you search for answers, and I know like one's like the Big Bang Theory, and we talked about that, and I'm like, well, what can bang if there's nothing there? Like, it doesn't make sense. You know what I'm saying? Like, the Big Bang Theory is apparently like this big explosion and things went into place, but if you look at the science aspect of it, something has to be there. Like, oxygen. There's oxygen, there's water, H2O, there's elements that play a part of it. So all this stuff couldn't just appear out of nothing. There has to be something that makes things grow, that puts things into a creative type of standpoint.
Yeah, and the guy sat me down one time, because I was thinking about these things, and he said, Wes, hold out your hand. So I held out my hand, and then he put something in my hand. And he said, close it. And so I closed it. And he said, what did I give you? And I opened up my hand and I looked inside of it. And I said, you gave me nothing. There was nothing inside my hand. And he said, that's right. Therefore, something had to always be. And I looked at him and I'm like, I don't understand. That's what I said. He said, so that's just me. I don't understand those things. He said, out of nothing, nothing comes. Therefore, something had to always be. And I thought about that, and I wrapped my head around it, and I'm like, yeah, there had to always be something in order for something to come out of something. Nothing comes out of nothing. And so that was simple. It's like a little simple thing, but it makes you go, oh, is that simple?
Well, you also just think about, like, so where do we get like morality? Like, where does stuff like that come from? Like, how do how do we know, what's good, what's bad, those type of things. I know we got a brain, but how does the brain know how to function? How does the heart know how to beat? How does all these things, even within like the human body, how does it all work, perfectly for what we're basically made for?
Well, honestly, and I think I talked about this previously, but, my faith grew exponentially, and it's going to sound crazy, but when I had my miscarriage, because to really wrap your brain around, to see this tiny little human, the tiniest little fingers and toes, and then to think about how all of that has to form and how many things have to go right, and how the fetus knows how to create like your womb that quickly, how your iris works and your nerves and how your blood vessels form and bones and what their functions are. Like, it is incredible. So, I 100% agree that, when you really think about that, like, really, you think this just happens by accident? Like, mm-hmm. That's what truly made my faith grow stronger, was to say there has to be something bigger. There has to be, because this doesn't just happen by accident. It's incredible.
No, I think we can chalk it up to a designer. I believe that. If you have any thoughts contrary to those things, by all means, you can share them with us. You can find us over on Twitter at Finding Faith Podcast, right, Pierre? That's how it is?
Finding Faith Pod.
Finding Faith Pod. And you can also email the show. How do they do that, Pierre?
That would be findingfaith.losingsleep@gmail.com.
That's right. You're so correct. I was putting you to the test. No, I didn't. I couldn't remember what it was. Or even the easier way to do that is to just leave a review or something, and you can leave a comment. And whatever listening platform you like to listen to the show on, you can do that there that way as well. So a lot of different avenues if you want to talk about these things. By all means, do that. And we are happy to accept all questions or maybe other answers. I'm a seeker, man. I like to seek. I like to try to find. And so that's what I love to do. We talk about a designer. And let me ask you guys this. Who designed the book of Genesis? Who wrote the book of Genesis? Do either one of you know?
I think the common thought is Moses.
Can you do it in that Charlton Heston voice?
No.
Moses. Oh. Yeah, Moses did. And he did it with the children of Israel. This was like when they were wandering around in the wilderness after they got led out of Egypt, which that story is back there at the end of Genesis, which hopefully we'll cover that as well over due time. Mm-hmm. So they were wandering around, and those guys had been in Egypt. The children of Israel had been, God's children had been in Egypt for such a long period of time in bondage there. And I don't know, making a bunch of bricks and everything is what they were doing. And essentially, there were so many generations that had come and gone that they started asking questions. And the best way I can figure this out is they raise their hand and they're like, Moses, where'd we come from? Moses, how did we get here? Moses, how did that mountain get so high? Moses, where did the sun come from? Moses, just asking these questions. It may not have been directly to Moses. It could have been to somebody else. But all these people were wanting these answers, just like children. You want those kind of answers. Your kids ever ask those kind of weird questions like that, where you're like, you really don't know why the grass is?
What do you mean just children? Grown adults also want those answers.
I was going to say, do your kids ever ask you why the grass is green? And then I just thought to myself, oh, why is the grass green? So I guess we all have the kid in us where we want to know these answers. Mm-hmm. And so God revealed these things to Moses, and he started writing them down for everybody to be able to know and to answer those kind of questions. So that's what this is all about. And you guys, the three of us, we talked about in past episodes God's rules, God's laws, and how they're there to protect us. Mm-hmm. And not be a, driving force like a mean old God or anything like that on top of us, but more of a loving, kind God who's wanting the best for us out of this life and wants us to squeeze all the juice out of this life that we can. And that goes to loving him and to loving our neighbors as ourselves. And that's why I believe he wrote the book of Genesis, or had the book of Genesis written, because just as kids ask those questions of us and we have to be patient and answer them, I think it's an understood thing that people are going to ask these kind of questions, and so we got to give them the answers.
Yeah, and it's helpful. I'll tell you that. And so, diving into Genesis, the first part, it's pretty enlightening when you think about, night and day and, dry land and the seas and just kind of how it all formed. Because it does start to answer those questions. And later on it gets a little tougher because like genealogy, like it loses me. It loses me at genealogy, but I also can understand, back then that it was almost like the alphabet, to them where they kind of knew their genealogy. But just starting with, how things came to be formed, just kind of helps me to imagine or use my imagination on how that all could have kind of taken place. And again, you look around the world and what you have, and you can see places that are kind of bare and dry that aren't filled with, grass and water and lakes and rivers, and it just kind of comes together. But even like the moon, you can kind of see how that, plays out on the moon itself. And, its purpose is completely different from somewhere like the Earth as well as the other planets.
You know what's cool about talking about these things? Is I'll be the first to admit I don't have all the answers, and so whenever I look at this, I think it's a big deal, and I think it's a little bit weighty, and putting it on a podcast instead of just sitting down and doing it with a buddy or something like that and talking about these things, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit weighty. This is going to be in the archives for a long time, and so I was a little bit nervous about talking about this, but I love studying the book of Genesis because it's so profound. And in Genesis 1:1 it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." God. That's why we call him God, is because that's how it is here. It's like Elohim. It's actually a plural word, and we'll see that a little bit later as the chapter unfolds. How there's more than one person kind of here. Is that's how I'm going to put it in my head. How I make sense of it. You may be able to make sense of it in a little bit different way, but it's a plurality word, which means there's like more than one being, and that's where we kind of get the start of the Trinity. The Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and we'll see that here as well. So what do you guys think about the Trinity? That's almost like a controversial topic too, I believe.
It's kind of hard to fathom at times, and I know that was actually a question I think our daughter had even asked at some point that Michelle can dive into a bit.
Yeah, Olivia had asked, how does she wanted to understand the difference, and I honestly, to be completely honest with you, had no idea how to explain that to her. So I asked one of our pastors at church, and she gave me the analogy of an apple. And so I started to explain it to Olivia, and she was just little. And I said, it's like an apple. And instantly she's like, say no more. I understand. And she's like, basically you have this, because which part is the apple? Is it the seed? Is it the fruit part on the inside, or is it the outside? And it's all the apple, but you have to have all of those pieces to make the one piece. But my child understood it better than I did before I even was explaining it. So, it was pretty incredible to have her, we say like children get things a little better than we do because their understanding isn't, kind of twisted. So oftentimes, out of the mouths of babes come really amazing things. But I thought that analogy was great because if you think about it, which part is the apple? Well, the peel, the sweet part in the middle, or the seeds, and it all is. So I think as far as like the Holy Trinity, it's all one, but there are three significant pieces. So it was a good analogy for me to give to her, and it helped me too.
And it all has three different roles and a purpose. Like the seed is to reproduce, the meat is or the meat of the apple, the part we like, the part we like to eat. I think it's called the meat. I don't know. It's the sweet stuff. That's good stuff. And then the skin is there to protect it from all the outside forces. So
exactly.
They all, and the Trinity is the same way. It's got all the different aspects of it. The Father, Son, Holy Spirit. They all have different roles. And you talked about the child understanding it, the faith of a child. And I think back to Jesus' whenever he said, if you have faith like a child, that phrase. And I wanted to talk about this a little bit before we dive into this. Well, faith, we got to have faith that God created the heavens and the earth. Right? I mean, you got to have faith, right?
Right.
And it's kind of a blind faith. I'll be the first one to admit it because we didn't see it when it happened. It's the one that makes the most sense to me. But you got to kind of have blind faith in that. And even the Bible in Hebrew says faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And no matter what or how you believe we came into existence, the earth came into existence, it takes faith.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's faith in a designer, a God, or a faith in the boom, boom, bang theory, you got to have faith because you weren't there at any of those things. So that person's faith that may believe in Darwin's theory of evolution is no different than my faith in God as far as equality goes, I think, because neither one of us actually see it happen.
Right.
That's true. And I mean, I even struggle with like evolution though. So I had my little rant on the Big Bang Theory. So if evolution, like I've never seen like a kitten like evolve into a lion. Like any kitten I've seen stayed a cat. It's just, I don't know, it's just so hard to, I know that, the mind, evolves and, even see like athletes, like for example, like athletes back in the day, in the 70s and 80s aren't the same as the athletes today who train differently and, feel their bodies differently, but they're still like humans. Like it wasn't like they didn't transform from like an ape or a gorilla, those type of situations. So just mentally, it's hard for me to fathom that. Whereas this makes sense. God makes sense. A creator that I can't understand makes sense for all that we have. That's so, I don't know, so complex to even think about. Like that adds up more. And when you read again the Bible and the creation, it kind of puts it together that this could be feasible.
Mm-hmm. And I'll be the first one to admit. Now, let me finish my statement. I do believe in evolution.
Okay.
But there's a minor evolution and there's a major evolution, right? The major evolution is wherever you have the evolution where one species becomes another species, or just complete transformation of like, holy cow, look at that. The thing that Darwin talks about, with the missing link and everything. Darwin even said himself that if you do not find a missing link, my theory, which by the way, it's called a theory, my theory is useless. If you never find a missing link, my theory is useless of whether it's a fish becoming a bird or whatever it is, whatever his theory of evolution is. But I do believe in minor evolution where, you take birds or something and you see the seeds on the Galapagos Island. How about that? I just impressed everybody by knowing the name of a Galapagos Island, didn't I?
You pronounced it right too. That's even more.
Yeah, don't ask me to drive you there. I couldn't get you there if I had to. But you see the different size seeds there on the island, and this is like this scientific case study where it's almost like this little bubble where they could put these people or these animals are there, and so they can go there and they can study these animals because they're really kind of secluded. And you see the bird sizes, the beaks of the birds grow or shrink depending on the size of the seeds from the year prior, because those birds that had to have smaller beaks because it was smaller seeds because the plants weren't doing as well, they were the ones that were more fruitful and multiplied more than the bigger bird beaks, bigger beaked birds. That's tough to say.
Say that 3 times.
So, but it changes depending upon the environment that people are or the animals are in. But it's not major evolution. It's just minor evolution within the same species. Did I make sense at any of that?
Yes, like adaptation. You adapt to your surroundings and such.
Yeah, I've adapted many times to my
me too.
So one of the things I always suggest for people to do whenever they talk about Genesis or whenever I talk about Genesis with them a little bit is to get out a piece of paper. And don't be small in your drawing of this, but you should draw this the way it reads from the book of Genesis. Okay. You know what I mean? Like in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and kind of put on a piece of paper as well, whatever piece of paper it is. And don't do this while you're driving. If you're listening to the podcast while you're driving, but just write up there, write somewhere on the piece of paper, some questions that you have, some people that you can identify, the names of things like God, right? God is there in the story. So we could put God there, find out who else is in the story. But also right now, he created the heavens and the earth. So it's kind of like setting everything up. And then the earth was formless and void in verse 2, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Boy, that's kind of cool sounding. I don't know how you guys see that in your head, but I know how I see it in my head. And it's one of those slow motion cameras filming like a raindrop dropping to the ground. And I understand there's maybe not even gravity at this point, but just how it's like almost jello-ish, and it just can move and toss around, but it kind of stays in its own little water shell if the water has shell. But you know what I mean? Like it just can get blown around a little bit or something. I don't know. Formless and void. I've always liked that phrase.
I think I don't know. It's weird. I almost feel like
Minister of fog.
Yeah, like something like a windy type mist, and I don't know. It's hard to kind of verbalize the thought process, but you just think about, like a foggy mist, and even almost like a beam that's like hovering over. That's kind of the same, like taking a similar type form. That's not like a physical being, but just like a spiritual being. That's just, I don't know. It's hard to put into words.
Well, it's appropriate, probably.
Yeah, probably.
All right. So we got the Spirit of God. We have the Spirit of God, and he's moving over the surface of the waters. I think that's the biggest key that we got to take out of this. Everything's like water right now. Okay. It's just water. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day. That's a lot of work in one day, in my opinion. Right there is where he needed to take a big break. Yeah, go ahead and go on vacation right now. You know, that seems like it's impossible to do, but for God, nothing is impossible, right? And so it's really hard to kind of fathom this. How much work was that? And then we realized, like from John chapter 1, as it associates itself with Genesis chapter 1, that it was just words. You know, it's God spoke these things, and it happened. And that's maybe not as much work as I think it is, because I'm speaking into a microphone and it gets put out there on a podcast, so it just happens.
Yeah, but these are major things. But I mean, I think about like that, even like in our prayers, like if God wants it to be, like how he can make it be, and even how quickly like things can happen. Like, and you see it sometimes when folks are praying for healing or praying for an answer, and all of a sudden, like boom, it's there. And that's not always the case. Sometimes it's long, sometimes it's delayed, but sometimes that prayer is answered like instantly. And you can just imagine, you know, God just speaking it into existence. And so why would that be any different for the earth?
Right.
That's a good point. All right. So I don't think this is sun and moon yet. I think this is just light and darkness. Okay. So I don't think the sun and moon is necessarily there. I don't know. That part, a little confusing. God called the light. Oh, we already did that. Verse 6, God said, let there be an expanse in the midst. Can I turn the page of my Bible, Pierre? I heard what you said, by the way, whenever I was listening to past podcasts, how it sounded like bags of chips and stuff.
It did.
It did sound like that. I apologize, everybody, but the Doritos were good. Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. And God made the expanse and separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning, a second day. All right. So if I'm drawing this on my piece of paper, you got one big old thing, right? A big circle. And I got to do a circle just because that's how my mind has been programmed all these years, like a globe kind of a thing, right? So you got this circle, and it was all water. And then he said he put an expanse in the middle of the water to separate the water from the water. And he's not talking about land. It's sky. It's the heavens. That's what the expanse is. So there's water above the heavens and there's water below the heavens. All right. Are we following it now?
I kind of want to like take a rocket ship and see how high it would go and if it would reach water, and thinking about this.
It's really mind-boggling if you like try. It's kind of like when I try to think about the universe, like it just blows my mind. So like it's the same type of thing. It's just even more impressive.
Because technically saying there should be water above, but obviously like we've been in like planes, and you know we've been above the clouds, and there's more sky, and we have, you know, those that have left the earth, and there's like a galaxy. So it makes you feel like there's even more that maybe is unreachable, that you're basically going to run into another form of water.
No, you're right, and that's the part that kind of, you go, okay, wait a minute, there, water above the, and then so above the earth and water below there's water above the firmament and water below the firmament. But then let me ask you guys this, okay? This is going to get into another topic, and this may be the last topic of the day. I don't know. Dinosaurs. That dinosaurs exist. We see the remnants of it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we see the bones, we see all that kind of stuff.
So I think it depends, because I'm not saying they don't, because we obviously have, the fossils, etc. But were they like dinosaurs, or is that just a name that was given to them? Because I know, like, for example, myself in reading through the Bible, I see like dragon mentioned a lot. Were the dragons actually the dinosaurs, and they just got named dinosaurs? And so I don't know. Those are kind of the thought processes that run through, like, what exactly was it? Like, was it a dinosaur? Was it a dragon? Was it a different being? And, we'll get to that even with the cherubims and stuff like that as well, I'm sure. But yeah, there was some existence. Is this, was the name changed? Was the translation different? Which I see in the Bible a lot as well, where one Greek word, Hebrew word means this, and that's not what it says. And just a little twist can change, what that is. So that's my thought on dinosaurs. Something existed, there's fossils, but was it a dinosaur? Was it something else with a different name? Those type of things.
Okay. I was waiting to hear if Michelle chimed in or not. So yes, I agree with you. The word dinosaur maybe didn't come into existence until then, but we know that, if I say for simplicity place, big old things. You know what I'm talking about? Like, you know what I'm talking about, the big old things. So the dinosaurs. Let me ask you this: what did dinosaurs eat?
Everything. It just depends on which dinosaur, right?
Yeah, I mean, you see some, and again, based off of how they're portrayed, there were some carnivores, there were some herbivores, and so it just all depends.
Yeah, I think a majority of them were herbivores, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that. And then there were the carnivorous ones as well, but I think a carnivorous dinosaur probably had to eat another dinosaur in order to have a full belly. Like, you can't, the carnivorous dinosaurs could not go around chasing rabbits, right? And because it just, first of all, I don't know that it could bend over to get them, but it would take a lot of rabbits to fill up a dinosaur. You know what I mean? Like, it just, so I think you had to have other dinosaurs in order for the carnivorous dinosaurs to survive. And I think that the herbivorous, I think that word is just made up. I just made it up. Dinosaurs had to have a lot of plants and had to have those things. So we haven't seen land come into existence yet, but land ends up getting placed in that little bit of water that's separated from the water above the firmament, right? So the land gets placed in the water below the firmament, and that's where the dinosaurs, if the big old things, would have ended up living. And you think about the environment that would have been with waters above the earth and waters below, or on the earth. It would have been like a greenhouse effect. You know what I mean? Like a really super humidy kind of a thing. You know what I'm talking about? Like if you put the sun in the middle of that, it just gets really humid. So I think that the plant life would be able to really just flourish way back when, especially if we didn't have all the buildings and everything like we have nowadays. But it'd really be able to flourish. So then the herbivore dinosaurs are plentiful. The carnivorous dinosaurs are plentiful. And you and I know that, well, I know anyway, that there was something that happened that just completely changed some of that stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like they found like woolly mammoths frozen in a weird place, like in the Antarctica, with flowers in their mouth, with flowers in their stomach. And there's not such a thing there on the North Pole or wherever it is where there is no those flowers. So what happened? There was something like instantaneously that happened, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what some people, speak to the flooding, and I know we're not into Noah, but that's one of those things as well, where it's like something would take place, and you look at how like mountains are formed, and like the Grand Canyon, for example, and just how it's all the rock as if something just rushed through there quickly and rose quickly, and kind of wiped out everything. And again, when you think about water being above, I think we often go to like rain and like rain clouds, but we've been over, if you've flown, you've been over rain clouds where, a pilot can get out of the rain. It would have to be a substantial amount of water out of nowhere to take place there. And so even with the dinosaurs or dragons, whatever you want to call them, it could have been a similar situation where something just drastic took place and just wiped out their existence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely there was something there. And so if we fast forwarded to like Genesis chapter 6 a little bit and the flood, and we'll get there eventually. I believe that we'll end up getting there. But if you look there, and God told Noah, build a big old ark and get all your family and put them in there and get the animals 2 by 2 and all that stuff and put them in there. And then if you look, and I'm trying to find it here because it's been a minute since I looked at this. Look like in Genesis chapter 7, verse 12, and it says the rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. All right, so we see that. But if you back it up, let's see, two verses, Pierre. If you back it up 2 verses and start reading there, you got your Bible with you?
I have it on my phone. So okay. You're talking about after 7 days, the water came all over the earth?
Yeah, Genesis 7, verse 10. Read 10 and 11 and 12 all together.
Yeah, so after the 7 days, the water came over all the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month of the 17th day of the month, all the fountains of the great deep came bursting through, and the windows of heaven were open, and rain came down on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights.
You see that? And, the interesting thing is it had never rained before this time. Never rained. That's why they mocked Noah, because he's building a boat. And they're like, hey, dude, it ain't never rained. It's going to come a flood, everybody. It's going to come a flood. Y'all better prepare. That's what Noah was saying. I think those were exact words Noah was saying. He was saying, y'all better prepare. And they were mocking him because it had never rained. And not only that, but there's no flooding. So everything was contained. And then it says here that the windows of heaven, the great burst opened up from underneath the land a little bit there, it feels like. And then the windows of heaven were opened up, and bam, for 40 days and 40. I don't think that's just rain. I think that's the windows of heaven where we just got done reading. To me, now this is me, the firmament separated the waters above and the waters below. Right? Mm-hmm. And those waters above, the windows of heaven were opened, and it just came a flood. That's how I can picture it in my head. That's how I can make sense of the great flood that's talked about in so many different societies along in Earth. So many different societies talk about this great big flood that ended up happening that just flooded out the earth, and that's that's how I can make the sense of it. Is right there from Genesis chapters. We were in Genesis chapter 7. That's how I can make sense of it.
I mean, it makes sense, and I never really read or thought it like that. But I mean,
that's why I'm here, Pierre. That's why I'm here.
Well, I mean, even when you think back to like the Garden of Eden, which I'm sure we'll get into as well. Like they were in the presence of God there, and that was a holy place, and they basically were exiled. They were kicked out, but there was at some point a connection to where they left, but there was a kind of a connection between earth and heaven when it came to the Garden of Eden. So what's to stop that from existing still?
Well, and not only that, but I mean, like pretty much Genesis is through Genesis, it's repeating like all of humanity's choice to either partner with God or reject him, right? Like you see it play out over and over and over again. You can either reject his instruction or you can partner with him. And we as humans just choose to follow our own way. And you see that from the beginning. Mm-hmm. So it's sad. For me, it's sad. Like, I'm like, man, we've had all of this time to learn from our mistakes. And yet, as humans, we're still repeating the cycle. And it's sad.
No, it is. It is. And we're even warned about it, right?
Right.
And we're told about it, and we still repeat the same thing. We're hard-headed, stubborn people, Lord, and we ask that you will please forgive us of that. So you got the waters above the heaven, waters below the heavens. Windows of heavens were opened up, and the water came flooding down, right? The environment changes then. And we're fast forwarding. I know in our picture we haven't drawn this yet or anything, but the sun gets put there in the middle of the firmament. The moon gets put there in the middle of the firmament. But now there's not as much greenhouse effect, if I'm saying that properly. Like it's just going to change if there's not waters above the earth and waters below the earth. If all there is waters on the earth, it's going to kind of change the whole environment. So maybe that change stopped the dinosaurs from being as plentiful. Maybe Noah did put dinosaurs on the ark. Maybe he put little ones, baby ones. I don't know. I don't have all the answers. Okay. Maybe they could swim and he tied them to the ark. Maybe they lived outside the ark.
That's a crocodile.
But the environment changed. So even if they did make it through the flood, maybe they couldn't be as plentiful and produce and reproduce and so forth. Maybe just things changed. So I don't know. That's how I don't know the answers, but kind of putting those pieces together makes the most sense out of it that I can make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's it. That's good. That's good. All right. Back over in Genesis, right? Where we were. We were talking about the water above the earth, water below the earth, and everything like that. And Pierre or Michelle, either one of you two, if you don't mind, how about if you guys start reading verse 9? Just start reading verse 9, and I'll stop you somewhere along the way of Genesis 1.
So, and God said, "Let the waters under the heaven come together in one place, and let the dry land be seen." And it was so. And God gave the dry land the name of earth, and the waters together in their places were named seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let grass come up on the earth, and plants producing seed, and fruit trees giving fruit, in which there is seed after the sort." And it was so. And grass came up on the earth, and every plant producing seed of sorts, and every tree producing fruit, in which it is seeds of its sorts. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day.
That's good. That's good. Good job. And what strikes me out at this one, Michelle, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said sort, Pierre. Mine says after their own kind, like they produce vegetation after their own kind, and I just it keeps happening like that whenever you're talking about the animals, even how they reproduce after their own kind. That kind of goes into the evolutional theory that we were talking about a little bit, where things become different things and everything. It just everything goes after its own kind. And I think about the reproduction part of things too, where God is wanting things to be fruitful and multiply, Michelle. And it's just like the things go after their own things, or the kinds go after their own kinds. And it got me thinking about animals even. Now, I know we got some strange dogs that end up doing things every once in a while to other things, but usually a cat reproduces with a cat. You know what I'm saying? Right. Or a lion with a lion. And it's still happening today. You don't see a rhinoceros looking at a giraffe and going, "Hey, that's some pretty nice long legs right there." It just doesn't seem to happen that way.
Right. They just inherently know. And so then that begs the question, how, if there's not a God, like how do they know? Right. Like, and I think it kind of goes back to, like, again, in Genesis, over and over again, we get the consistency of God's promise to rescue and restore. So if it didn't work that way and we didn't find our own kind, like, then God's promise isn't there. Like, so I think it's mind blowing to me when you think, like, how, like you said, how the rhinoceros knows to find the rhinoceros, right? Like, how are they communicating? Like, what is it? Is it the pheromones? Like, because God puts all of that in play. So just the minute details of everything that he does that we often don't even think about is just mind boggling. Like I said, like when I think about the universe, it's the same type of thing.
Even think about like seeds and trees, and like every year,
garden,
like they just reproduce. And I mean, I know over time things can take place, but I mean, you can plant a little seed and, put it in the ground, and if enough water, enough light, it's going to produce exactly what it needs to produce. And it does it over and over again. Like we up here in the Midwest have, all 4 seasons, Wes. and with that, you see like trees, in the wintertime just kind of wilt and die, but around comes the spring, they're starting to sprout again without us doing anything. We're not touching the trees ourselves with a human aspect of it. They're just growing and blossoming, and it's like a cycle. And it happens throughout the whole world. It doesn't just happen, here in the United States. It's everywhere. This all takes place.
It's incredible.
And I think about a tomato plant. It produces tomatoes. It doesn't produce cucumbers, and the cucumbers produce cucumbers. That's what it does.
Right.
But we can make. We've figured it out. We've become little gods to some degree, where we can make some hybrids of things. You know what I mean? Like we can change these we can tweak these things just a little bit to try and figure out a way to get a lemon to grow on an orange tree.
Right.
But it wasn't intended to be that way. But we have made it that way. We've decided to change the plan. Man has decided to kind of tweak it to fit our own needs, or maybe even we don't need it to happen that way. We just want to see if we can.
It's that God complex.
Yeah, it is that God complex. But I'm going to go deep right here. Y'all don't hate me, okay? Y'all don't hate me. If you do, you can reach me over on Twitter at PeeWee31. But I think about. I just think about society today, and we've changed things so much to fit our desires. We've tweaked it so much to not necessarily figure out a way to produce with our own kind. And this is going to be controversial. Y'all don't hate me. I'm just thinking out loud. But this was Pride Month, right? It was Pride Month. And I've seen a lot of different parades going up and down different places, and I don't know what to believe because I didn't necessarily see that many of them here where I live. But I see women dressing like men and men dressing like women. I see men dressing like vulgar men out in front of children. And I see parents bringing children to these things to let them see this. And I'm personally, you all know my background, and if you don't, you can go listen to past podcasts. I've seen a lot of things that I never should have seen, and it ingrained in my mind and it ingrained in my head to where it's like one of those shocking moments that I can't ever forget, but I wish I never saw. And for me as a parent, I always think that my number one job is to protect my child's innocence for as long as possible. Right. I need to protect my child's innocence as long as possible, just like you talked about, Pierre. I hope we all do get to go back to the Garden of Eden at some point into heaven where we will be innocent. There will be no sin. There will be no night there. We'll be able to have things the way we did as a child and looked at life as maybe a childlike way. So when I see children at these events, I'm going, there is no possible way that these grown adults should be doing this in front of children. There's no way that I would ever dream of bringing my children to that. And look, these are your kids. I got my kids. You got your kids. We can both screw them up however we want to. Okay. That's our inalienable right for having children. But I go back to this little time here where animals were reproducing with their own kind. Vegetation was reproducing with its own kind. If everything moves into this pride area, then things are going to stop reproducing. And if they do reproduce, maybe they won't be reproducing with their own kind. And I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg, but maybe we change things to fit our own desires more so than God changing things along the way. I'm trying to be sensitive as I talk, and I'm trying to be kind of blunt at the same time. So forgive me if I'm too blunt, but I just don't know what ended up happening first, Pierre, in all this. And I'll throw it over to you so I can just sit back and.
So I think that's throughout though, and I think pride always gets brought up, but people don't bring up divorce. People don't bring up adultery. And maybe it's because it's not thrown in your face. So my thought of if it's sin, it's all sin. And I'm kind of an opinion that Christians hate gays, hate the homosexual community just by the way they react to them. If these are still human beings that we're called to love and neighbors that we're called to love, we can't do so, not accepting them as humans. It's one thing to accept the sin itself. It's another to accept them as humans.
Okay.
And I think we struggle with that. And I think that pride is a very interesting name that goes about it, both from the standpoint that it's in your face and there's a prideful impact to it, to where it's going to be in your face. But on the flip side, I think those outside of there are too prideful to find a way to accept the people themselves. Me as a sinner, I don't find Jesus if someone didn't accept me and show me Jesus. So I don't know how those under pride can find Jesus themselves, if those who say, they're Jesus followers can't figure out a way to accept them, just as we've accepted those that are divorced, those that are committing adultery, those that have even committed murder to some extent. These are all sins. So where do we go about the acceptance of the people and doing what God says to do above all else, which is loving him and loving your neighbors as yourself?
Great points.
Pierre and I have had very so many conversations about this, and I have struggled with it because I have family members who are on that side of this, and you still want to love them, and I see the good that many of them have done and love God, and so it's tough. And I'm with you though on this, Wes, where it's first of all, I'm not judging here. It's just something that I thought of, and this is probably going to be really controversial too, but it's called pride, but pride is a deadly sin. So that kind of struck me. It's not to say, that's why or anything like that. I'm not saying that, but for me, I'm with you on the reproductive part, because that's kind of the argument back and forth up here. And I've had not argument, but just discussion. But for me, I don't think it's up to us to judge. I will agree with him on that, and that we are called to love like Jesus, and Jesus loved the sinners and those who were rejected and despised. So I agree with him wholeheartedly that we are called to love one another no matter what. What makes it tough for me is if I really try to look at it fundamentally in God's intent for us, if it's not a man and a woman and you can't reproduce, which I believe God wants us to, then that raises that question, is it right? But I also believe, I'm divorced. So my whole struggle with getting my divorce is I made the biggest promise there was, to God, that I'm going to be with this person for my life. And so my struggle in leaving that relationship was breaking that promise. But ultimately I had to get down to the fundamental question was, for me, do I believe that God wants better for me, or is this what he has? Because ultimately I'm still human and I can make an error in judgment. And I honestly believe that was my human error in judgment, and God had more for me. So but it's still something I have to reconcile with him when my judgment day comes. So it doesn't mean that I have to believe and agree with everything everyone else does. That's not up to me to judge. But right. I agree with you, Wes, as well, that I want to protect my child's innocence and mine too, in some way, shape, or form. So, I don't know. This is where Pierre and I talk about this a lot, because quite honestly, I think we both struggle with it a lot, and how the church reacts. And, he and I have different feelings about it. And I think that, everybody probably does. But ultimately what I come down to for me is, number one, it's up to us to love one another as Jesus did. And number two, it's not up to us to judge others. But that said, it's also tough as a Christian, because where do you draw that line between standing up for what what we believe the Bible says, and I say we believe because it's interpretation sometimes, and letting everyone have their freedom to do what they believe is correct. So I don't know. This is a tough one. Thanks,
hey, that's no, listen, and we've said that, and we're not taking a tough stance. We're trying to talk about tough topics. Yep. That's what we try to do, and to get the different, and that's what I said earlier. And look, we knew we were going to talk about Genesis. Michelle and Pierre didn't know where I was going with that, and I really didn't know where I was going with that necessarily. But that, as I prepared for this a little bit and just had these thoughts marinating in my head, that was a thought that went through my mind, and it may not have went through my mind unless it was June and it was Pride Month, right? And so maybe it didn't. But I saw something the other day on Twitter, and I found it again while you were talking, Michelle. And I'm going to be, I think I may be a genius after you guys may say, Wes, you're a pretty smart guy. That's what you may say after this, and some of you may not. But I talked about Edward Bernays a couple of episodes ago, the father of advertisement. And I talked about how he helped women end up smoking and stuff, and how he made smoking end up being a fashionable thing. And we have that still advertising genius and prowess here nowadays, where it influences people to do all those things, right? And so I go back and I think about different things, and one of the things I think about is, like, how many people did I know that would have participated in the Pride Month whenever I was growing up as a kid? Now, I knew some people, right? But they were all older people, not necessarily any of my peers. And I can understand maybe why not, if they were. I understand that. But this was an interesting study that I saw, and it was by Statista is what it was by. And it talked about it has these little bar graphs, and I'm never going to be able to explain a lot of these things. But Generation Z, starting there in the year 1997, people that were born between 1997 and 2004, like they are the biggest ones that identify as LGBT right now in today's society. 20% of those people that were polled, U.S. adults, identify as LGBT. Isn't that something? I mean, that seems like you go down to the people that were born before 1946, right? 1946, as of today, it is 1.7%. Mm-hmm. Baby boomers, people that were born kind of between the years 1946 and 1964, it is 2.7%. Generation X, 1965 and 1980, is 3.3%. And millennials, which were born between 1981 and 1996, it's 11.2%. You can kind of see these graphs. They all stay the same, except for that Generation Z, where over a 3-year period, it went 5 points higher, or 5% higher. And I got to say, I wonder, okay, are we getting influenced by the advertisers, by the things we see? And that's why that people maybe identify as that more so, because it's the fashionable thing to do, or it's a cool thing to do. I don't know that, because I know that my grandparents, or even myself, who watches Matlock, I don't see a lot of those people on the television show Matlock, but how many people do you see on the television shows that maybe Disney puts out or other people put out? I don't know, because I don't watch those things. So I'm not necessarily sure.
It goes back to one of our episodes of options. Our first episode of options. Like, once it's an option, it's in your head, right? Like, it's an option now. So if someone isn't happy with who they are, well, now I have a different option. But again, ultimately, I think that the big lesson in this is it's not okay to hate, period. Okay. It's for us. We need to love one another, and we're not going to reach people if we hate them.
I think that's what even triggers some of it. I'm sure, because I've had friends, I've had coworkers, etc., and there's like a lack of acceptance is often what a lot of it comes down to. And I don't know where the breakdown is, and I haven't lived that life. But society always tries to tell you what you have to be, what you can and can't do. And when that happens, I mean, you're going to have rebellion, for one. You're going to have people that do it just so they can rebel and kind of be against the norm. but you're going to have people that feel they need to do it in order to be accepted. For example, like growing up, little boys don't play with Barbie dolls, etc. That was just a thing that they go around, boys don't play with dolls. But I mean, if you're a boy that likes dolls, then, like dolls. But if that's what you're being told, you see little girls playing with dolls. Okay, then I want to be, a little girl. I want to be able to do what I find fun. And society tells you that you can't do that because, you got to be strong. You got to be tough. You got to be bold. And I mean, you do need strength, but I just feel like that just turns people off and they feel like they're not happy. They can't be who they want to be. So they try to change it and they try to be something else. And honestly, oftentimes that doesn't end up being happy as well because they're searching in the wrong places. But I just think that sometimes us as a society put so much pressure on what you can and can't do that's outside of the Bible. These are, man-made type of rules. And it just starts to bother people. And, they start to go through their own changes, trying to figure out who they are as an individual when they're, young, when they're teenagers, because they don't know. They want to do certain things and they're being told, oh, no, that's not for you. Who's to tell me what's not for me except for God?
Well, and, honestly, Pierre and I've had this conversation so many times that it isn't lost on us, too, that, not too many years ago, it would have been not looked upon very well for us to be married. So, it's kind of eye-opening and,
And so I'll even use that. So let's say we were in a society where I love my wife. I'm black, she's white. And they're saying that I can't love her. I'm going to have a problem with that. And I know that's kind of the way with a homosexual, and whether, since this is within the Bible, we're okay. But since, Leviticus, has a portion in the Bible, it's so wrong. And there's no sin, in the love towards my wife. There's no hate. I can't help, the way I feel about her. And I feel like that could be a similar situation for others. And if it was wrong, what would I do? Is what I think. So if it came out that me loving my wife because she's white and I'm black was wrong, I would basically be in the same situation where the world, and whether it be Christians, whoever, telling me I can't do this, God says is wrong, but I'm watching a world full of many things that God says is wrong, that God's people are accepting or saying at least they repent it. And it's okay. And it's not okay for me to simply love someone else. And you talk about reproducing. I mean, there are gay couples that are better parents than heterosexual couples. And again, I'm not sure what makes it right or wrong, but just keep that in mind. There was a heterosexual relationship that took place, and they threw the kid to the curb or didn't want the kid. And it took, a gay couple to take that child into a loving home that they didn't get from the other side. So there's just so many different ins and outs. And that's why I don't really worry about it. I let people be what they want to be and love what they want to love. And I'm going to love them in return, because that's what I get out of the Bible. Jesus wasn't in there, with priests and pastors and Christians. He was in there with tax collectors and sinners and prostitutes. That's who he was doing life with. So that's who I'm going to do life with.
I'm not a prostitute, by the way.
Well, listen, there's so many things that Pierre said. Good job, Pierre. You did a good job breaking it down very passionately.
A little bit. I'm just saying.
No, that's very passionate there, and I appreciate that. Hey, you're black and you're white. Did you guys had a kid together?
Yes.
Did you? What color was the kid?
She's both.
Cream? Is it a cream tannish kind of color?
She's a light brown and she's beautiful.
No, listen, and because you guys came together like your own kind to come together there and produce a child. Mm-hmm. One of my thoughts is, how does homosexuality continue to increase? Because if a homosexual couple comes together, what color kid do they have?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's about genes, and if it's about our body types and reproducing and you think about like the Galapagos Island stuff again. You think about that. Wouldn't it become more extinctual instead of increasing?
Mm-hmm.
I think about that. I wonder about that. So if homosexuals can't necessarily reproduce after their own kind, then how is it continuing to increase? It's got to be outside forces instead of inside forces, unless we're inserting chemicals maybe or something like that to change things on the inside of our bodies. I don't know. And those are thoughts. Listen, I have thoughts, okay, and I don't know how it continues to increase, but yet it can't increase naturally. Look, we're trying to hammer some things out. We're trying to talk about some things, and these things are really tough. And I wondered whether or not we should talk about these things a little bit, guys. I'm be honest with you. And then when I did stumble across the suicide, the abortion episode, I said, well, we've already talked about some stuff. So maybe we can talk about some other stuff. And I love what you said, though, Pierre, about loving people and who Jesus was with and what his purpose was. And it was spreading God's love is what it was. And I think that is the foremost and utmost thing that we need to do. And that's how we're going to make this world a better place. If I'm going to steal a phrase there.
Hey, that's my goal. Like I'm trying to get to heaven. I hope as many of you come with me as possible. But at the end of the day, I'm only can control me. And I'm understanding the Bible the way I understand it. And again, these were similar scenarios when it came to rules and laws. And Jesus is like, hey, you don't get it. And he even mentioned again, above all else. So that's what I'm doing. I'm doing above all else because that's what the Bible told me to do.
And look, we may not get it either. I may not get it. I understand that. I may not get it. I'm an open mind. I think about things, but you can tell I thought about these things. It's not just stuff that I'm rattling off here. I thought about this stuff. It perplexes me. It keeps me up at night. That's why we started this podcast, Finding Faith and Losing Sleep podcast, so we could talk about these things. And I know Pierre's still going to talk to me after this. I know Michelle's still going to talk to me after this. Yep. I know I have friends that I've asked to listen to this who are homosexuals, and they're still going to talk to me after this because we've talked about these things, and I'm still waiting for good answers that satisfy me. And so I'm putting it out there. If you have a good answer for me, by all means, you can reach us at Finding Faith Pod over on Twitter, at findingfaith.losingsleep@gmail.com. I'm close to saying that right here.
Before the email address, it's just findingfaith.losingsleep@gmail.com. Yes.
Or you can reach us over there on whatever listening platform you like to listen to us on by giving us some, ratings there. We ask that you give us a 5-star. We don't want you to lie, but if you got to lie, just no 5 stars or whatever stars you want to, or however you rate those things. I don't even know. I don't know that I've ever rated anything, but you can reach us over there
now. So thanks. We're still at 5. I think we got 140 ratings there. So
all right.
We reached 5,000 downloads recently. So. Wow. Just thanks to everyone that tunes in. Hopefully that continues as we continue to dive into some of these tough topics. But even if it doesn't, we're doing this for God and hoping it reaches some of you. But just a heads up there on our.
But you can leave a comment. You can leave a comment over there as well. That's cool though. 5,000. That's fine. So you can leave a comment over there as well if you want to reach us. And look, please, we're trying to say this stuff out of love. We ask that you'll try to do the same thing. But the thing we always ask everybody is you pray for us and we will pray for you.